The morning sun was nothing but a slap in the face for Jeff, a 13-year-old kid who had recently been uprooted from his life and planted in a new neighborhood, thanks to his parents' inexplicable desire for a change of scenery. The reality was much harsher. A bigger house in a friendlier neighborhood was code for, "Your lives are about to turn into a steaming pile of shit." Jeff and his older brother Lou shared the same brown hair and height of 5'7", but that's where the similarities ended. Jeff was the more volatile of the two, while Lou was the one who managed to keep his shit together. They were each other's rock in a world that seemed to enjoy pissing on them from a great height. As the brothers stepped off the bus on their first day at the new school, they exchanged a glance that said it all. Fuck our lives. Surprisingly, the day was not a complete dumpster fire. They made it through most of the day without being humiliated or beaten up, which was a fucking miracle. But then lunchtime rolled around, and they crossed paths with the school's resident assholes, Randy, Keith, and Troy. Randy was the tallest and acted like he was the king of the world, while Keith and Troy were nothing more than his dumb fuck minions. They sauntered over to Jeff and Lou with smirks that screamed, "We're going to fuck with you." "Hey, new kids," Randy sneered, trying to sound all high and mighty. "How's your first day going?" Before they could answer, Randy continued, "I hope you brought some money for the new kid tax." He held out his hand, as if they would just hand over their cash. Confused, Lou tried to play it cool. "We didn't know about any tax," he said, attempting to keep his voice steady. "Can you tell us more about it?" Randy's smirk turned into a cocky grin. "Sure," he said, casually pulling out a knife and twirling it between his fingers. "The tax is everything you have in your pockets. Give it to us, and we won't have to fuck you up." Keith and Troy also pulled out knives, grinning like the morons they were. Adrenaline surged through Jeff. He had to protect his brother from these pricks. Without thinking, he lunged at Randy, knocking the knife from his hand and punching him in the face. Keith and Troy were caught off guard, giving Lou the chance to throw a few punches, but soon they were outnumbered and the fight took a turn for the worse. A passerby saw the brawl and called the cops. When the officers arrived, they quickly assessed the situation and detained all 5 boys. Even though Randy, Keith, and Troy were clearly the assholes, Lou shockingly claimed that he started the fight. He was arrested and taken away, leaving Jeff feeling a cocktail of guilt, helplessness, and rage that would eventually send him spiraling down a very dark path. Jeff was left in a world of chaos after Lou was arrested. His parents, of course, were pissed, but not at Randy, Keith, and Troy, who were clearly the fuckwads in the situation. Instead, they directed their anger at Lou for getting arrested and at Jeff for not stopping it from happening, as if he could have done anything to stop his brother from taking the fall for him. Jeff was left swimming in a pool of guilt and frustration, feeling like the world had taken a giant shit on him. Days turned into weeks, and the weight of his brother's absence bore heavily on Jeff. His parents tried to keep him busy with mundane tasks and activities, but it only served to deepen the depression that was slowly consuming him. The darkness inside was growing, fueled by the unfairness of it all. A glimmer of hope appeared on the horizon when a neighbor invited Jeff and his family to a party. Maybe this was a chance for Jeff to forget about the clusterfuck his life had turned into, even if it was just for a little while. But as it turns out, the universe had other plans. As the family arrived at the party, Jeff tried to put on a happy face, but it felt like he was wearing a mask that could fall off at any moment. His parents, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing inside him, encouraged him to go out and make friends. Reluctantly, Jeff mingled with the other kids, trying to blend in and appear normal. For a while it seemed to be working, but then he saw them. Randy, Keith, and Troy, the 3 fuckwits who had turned his life upside down. As they approached him with sinister smiles, Jeff felt a surge of anger so powerful, it almost knocked him off his feet. This was it. This was the breaking point. With a snarl, Jeff lunged at Randy, his fists flying. It was a cathartic release of all the pent-up rage and frustration he had been carrying around. The fight was brutal and Jeff was outnumbered, but he didn't care. He was a man possessed, fueled by a desire for vengeance. Keith, always the dirty fighter, threw a bottle of bleach at Jeff. dousing him in the liquid. As the bleach burned his skin, Jeff's vision turned red. He was no longer in control. With a primal scream, he tackled Keith to the ground, pummeling him without mercy. Randy, seeing an opportunity, lit a match and threw it at Jeff. The bleach ignited and Jeff was engulfed in flames. The pain was excruciating, but it only served to fuel his rage further. He fought through the pain, managing to land a few more punches before collapsing to the ground unconscious. As the flames were extinguished and Jeff was rushed to the hospital, the darkness inside him took over completely. There was no turning back now. Jeff was on a one-way path to becoming something much darker, something much more dangerous. Jeff the Killer was born. The hospital room was sterile and cold, a stark contrast to the inferno that had consumed Jeff just hours earlier. His entire body was wrapped in bandages, the pain a constant reminder of the hell he had been through. The doctors were amazed he had survived at all, let alone with most of his faculties intact. When the bandages were finally removed, Jeff was confronted with the reality of his new existence. His face was a grotesque mask of scars, the skin stretched tight over his skull. His lips were a bright, almost garish red, and his once brown hair had turned black from the burns. But the most startling change was in his eyes. They were no longer the soft, gentle brown they once were. Now they were a cold, dead black, devoid of any warmth or humanity. Strangely, Jeff found himself fascinated by his new appearance. It was as if the person staring back at him from the mirror was someone else entirely, someone powerful and dangerous. The darkness inside him had manifested itself physically, and Jeff felt a strange sense of satisfaction. He was no longer the weak, helpless boy he once was. Now, he was a force to be reckoned with. His transformation was not just physical, however. Jeff's mind was also changing, warping into something dark and twisted. He felt a surge of exhilaration every time he thought about the pain he had inflicted on Randy, Keith, and Troy. He found himself fantasizing about all the ways he could make them suffer, each scenario more gruesome than the last. His parents, unaware of the monster their son was becoming, were relieved when the doctor declared him fit to go home. But as they drove back to their house, Jeff couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. He knew he could never go back to his old life, but he wasn't quite sure what his new life would entail. Later that night, as Jeff lay in bed, he found himself unable to sleep. The darkness inside him was restless, urging him to take action. With a sense of grim determination, Jeff made his way to the bathroom. He stared at his reflection for a long time, the twisted smile on his face growing wider with each passing second. Finally, with a sense of finality, he picked up a knife and began to carve. The pain was intense, but Jeff welcomed it. It was a reminder that he was alive, that he was in control. He carved his face into a permanent smile, a grotesque parody of the happiness he once felt. He then burned off his eyelids, ensuring that he would always be able to see the world for what it truly was. As he stood there, blood dripping down his face, Jeff felt a sense of clarity wash over him. He was no longer bound by the constraints of society, no longer held back by the expectations of others. He was free to carve his own path, to create his own destiny. With a sense of grim satisfaction, Jeff cleaned himself up and made his way back to his bedroom. He knew that his journey was just beginning, and that there would be many challenges ahead. But for the first time in his life, Jeff felt truly alive, and he couldn't wait to see what the future had in store for him. Jeff's transformation into a monster, both physically and mentally, was complete. He felt a rush of power coursing through his veins, a sense of invincibility that was both intoxicating and terrifying. His parents, unaware of the horrors their son had inflicted upon himself, slept soundly in their bedroom, blissfully ignorant of the nightmare that was about to unfold. As Jeff stood outside their bedroom door, knife in hand, he felt a pang of regret. They were his parents, after all, the people who had raised him, cared for him, loved him. But as he thought back to all the times they had dismissed his feelings, ignored his pleas for help, he felt his resolve harden. They were just as responsible for his descent into madness as Randy, Keith, and Troy, and they would pay for their negligence. With a sense of grim determination, Jeff stepped into the bedroom and approached his mother. She stirred slightly as he stood over her, but did not wake up. With a surge of adrenaline, Jeff plunged the knife into her chest, the sound of her gasp mingling with the rush of blood in his ears. His father woke up immediately, confusion and horror etched on his face as he took in the scene before him. Jeff turned to him, his eyes cold and emotionless as he drove the knife into his father's heart. It was over quickly, and as Jeff stood there, covered in his parents' blood, he felt a sense of satisfaction wash over him. He had taken control of his life, reclaimed his power, and it felt good. But as he looked down at the lifeless bodies of his parents, a wave of emptiness washed over him. He had thought that killing them would bring him a sense of closure, a sense of peace. But all he felt was a hollow emptiness, a void that seemed to consume him from the inside out. It was at that moment that Jeff realized he would never find peace, never find solace in the arms of another. He was a monster, a creature of the night, and he would embrace that identity with every fiber of his being. With a sense of grim determination, Jeff left his childhood home, stepping out into the night. He knew that his journey was just beginning, and that there would be many challenges ahead. But he was ready to face them head-on, ready to embrace his new identity as Jeff the Killer. As he disappeared into the darkness, a sense of anticipation filled the air. Jeff was no longer a helpless victim, no longer a scared little boy. He was a killer, a predator, and he was ready to hunt. Jeff, now fully transformed into the infamous Jeff the Killer, found himself wandering aimlessly through the streets of his hometown. The cool night air did nothing to soothe the burning hatred that consumed him from the inside out. His mind raced with thoughts of revenge, not just against Randy, Keith, and Troy, but against anyone who crossed his path. He was a ticking time bomb, a creature of darkness ready to explode at any moment. As he walked through the desolate streets, he came across a group of teenagers hanging out in a park. They were laughing and joking around, completely unaware of the danger that lurked in the shadows. Jeff felt a surge of anger rise up within him. How dare they be so carefree, so happy when he was suffering so much? It was time to teach them a lesson. Approaching the group with a sinister smile plastered on his face, Jeff pulled out his knife and lunged at the nearest teenager. The boy let out a scream of terror as Jeff plunged the knife into his chest. The others scattered in all directions, but Jeff was quick on their heels. One by one, he hunted them down, savoring the look of fear in their eyes as he ended their lives. Bloodied and exhilarated, Jeff stood in the middle of the park, surrounded by the lifeless bodies of his victims. The feeling of power was intoxicating, and he reveled in it. But as the adrenaline wore off, he was once again consumed by a sense of emptiness. Killing these innocent teenagers had brought him no closer to finding peace, no closer to filling the void that had opened up inside him. Frustrated and restless, Jeff continued his journey through the night, determined to find a purpose, a reason for his existence. He knew that he could never go back to his old life, could never be the person he once was. But he also knew that he couldn't continue on this path of mindless violence. There had to be more to his existence than just pain and suffering. As the sun began to rise on a new day, Jeff found himself standing outside the home of Randy, Keith, and Troy. The memories of that fateful day came flooding back, and with them, a renewed sense of purpose. He was no longer just a killer. He was a bringer of justice, a righter of wrongs. And it was time for Randy, Keith, and Troy to pay for their sins. With a sense of determination, Jeff stepped into the house, ready to face his demons once and for all. Stepping inside the house was like entering a different world. A sense of dread hung in the air, suffocating everything in its path. It was as if the house itself was alive, pulsating with a malevolent energy that threatened to consume Jeff whole. But he was resolute, determined to confront the ghosts of his past and put an end to his torment. The house was eerily silent, a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded there just a few weeks earlier. Jeff made his way through the rooms, each one holding a piece of the puzzle that was his fractured psyche. He could see himself in each room, reliving the moments that led him to this point. As he entered the living room, Jeff was hit with a wave of nostalgia. This was where it all began, where he first crossed paths with Randy, Keith, and Troy. He could still see them in his mind's eye, taunting him, threatening him, pushing him to the edge. And he could see himself, the person he used to be, fighting back with a fury that took even him by surprise. It was here that he first tasted the thrill of violence, the power that came with it. And it was here that he lost a part of himself that he would never get back. Standing in that room, Jeff felt a pang of sadness for the boy he once was, but he also felt a sense of pride for the man he had become. Moving through the house, Jeff came to the room where the fire had started. The walls were blackened with soot, the smell of burnt wood still lingering in the air. It was here that he had been pushed to his limit, where he had fought back with everything he had, and where he had ultimately been consumed by the flames. As he stood there staring at the charred remains of his past, Jeff was hit with a wave of emotions. Anger, sadness, regret, all of it came crashing down on him at once. He had been through so much, had suffered so much, and for what? To become a monster. In that moment, Jeff made a decision. He was done running from his past, done hiding from his demons. It was time to face them head on, to confront the darkness within him, and find a way to move forward. With a newfound sense of determination, Jeff left the house and headed out into the world. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that he was ready to face it, whatever it may be. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to watch this next video on what happens when you summon Laughing Jack.